Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to spend the next hour with you and hopefully provide you with some additional ideas and tips or some frameworks around setting goals. So a little bit about myself. My name is Josh Lefebvre. I'm the Director of Graduate Business Programs at Clarkson University in the Ray School of Business. But I'm a lifelong St. Lawrence County resident, and I'm the co-chair of the St. Lawrence County Leadership Institute and have been heavily involved in trying to, help provide some leadership, professional development, growth opportunities in the county. Just give some ideas and tips around things to help us not only in our own work, our professional lives, but also, it bleeds into our personal lives and our other obligations, whether it's community service or, managing or leading groups in our church at home or, or other nonprofit organizations, service organizations. All of these things transcend. And when I was asked about this particular one, I always love the idea of setting goals and trying to provide information and things, that you can use hopefully in your work. Some of the things I'll talk about, you might have heard about today, but hopefully I can still give you some great ideas and things to take away. In addition to the slides, I do have a worksheet that I've created that can help you guide you through some of the things to make sure you're doing when you're setting goals. So we'll definitely touch base on that. But so anyway, so that's who I am. I grew up in Norwood, live in Messina, I have two beautiful daughters, and I just love the opportunity to be here with all of you today. But I know we only have an hour, so we can definitely get started. So today's session is going to focus around goal setting, and hopefully provide you some framework for all of those things. And as far as etiquette with Zoom and sessions, I definitely don't mind if you unmute yourself, or if you have a question, you can certainly ask. I won't necessarily see it in the chat, though I'll try, and we can certainly do questions at the end. But if something pops up in your mind, maybe you have an idea or you want to share a story about something, I always encourage that as well. Because I think that part of the learning, especially in an online environment, is that we give ourselves that opportunity like we would in a workshop in person. I've learned some tips and tricks when it comes to Zoom over the time. And I'm actually, before we get going, I want to see if I have the opportunity to I don't, so we'll just keep going. But here we go. So whenever I start a session and try to provide some tips and things, I always like to think about a quote so that when we walk away with it, we can think about what that quote meant. And for me, this one is, you can't cross the sea merely by standing and staring at the water. And I think a lot of times we think of metaphors when it comes to things we're trying to teach or understand. This one here is, you can look out there and know that you want to get over to an island, for instance, but you can't get there without having some kind of a plan. And I think that really that the goal of today is to give us ideas for how to create those plans. What are some things to be thinking about? So that's my goal through this quote for today. So first, let's start with, and for those of you that, it's an opportunity to engage, but you don't necessarily have to. I can't remember the quote that somebody in school used to say to me is something about taking a risk, but opportunity to pass. And basically he was just saying, hey, if you feel like raising your hand and engaging, please do. So I always start with, what we're coming into with an idea of what is a goal. So does anyone feel like sharing in your own words what you see a goal? What is, if I did to say, let's define a goal, what is it? Does anyone want to just share? If I were in a conversation with you, say, how would you define a goal? What is it?
Something you wish to accomplish.
Yep, that's perfect.
Someone in the chat said a dream with the plan from Jen. And then Rebecca says something to work towards. And Mamie says an aim to accomplish.
I love it. It makes me think of that Disney quote, a dream is a wish your heart makes. So maybe that's also a goal, right? So perfect. So yeah, there's some accomplishment according to all of what you're saying. There's some kind of end goal, right? And we all kind of see, we know we want the organization to be able to accomplish this, or we know in my department, I would love to be able to do this. A lot of times goals are tied to strategic plans. Now, sometimes goals can be very subjective, so we have to try and create some framework around that. And what we're going to talk about in terms of goals and achieving goals, I'm sure many of you have heard different types of things, right? We'll talk about some acronyms that are out there as far as achieving goals. It's subjective in the sense of we have our own interpretation of what the end result is going to be. But at the end of the day, goals should be aligned with and from an organizational context, you have a strategic plan, you have a direction that you want to take the organization. For yourself, maybe you have a personal goal, something that you want to achieve down the road. So you're all right on the same path. And I think it's important that we go right to the basics, right? In terms of a goal setting, what is a goal, right? And I think a lot of times goals can be put as synonymous with something else. I have a goal of doing something when really it is a strategic direction that we're going to take. But I actually want to break down the word goal into actually 3 parts. So we're going to talk about that today. So yes, goal is something you want to achieve, the end towards which effort is directed. I think I like to say that which effort is directed, because a goal requires things like the motivation behind it. It requires empowerment, right? When other people are a part of those different goals. So just like the idea of, I do another talk where we talk about what leadership is. Leadership is the influence which is created through power. So just like here, in order to get something moving, there has to be that effort. Goals are dreams and wants, except a goal is more specific. And then, however, goals, I like to say goals are like ladders without the rungs. You can see the top of the ladder, but you can't necessarily get there. So the hope today is to give you some tools for how to actually create the rungs to get you there. And that's really an piece to that. So why do we set goals? Similar to what is a goal, why do we set them? We know what they are, but from all of your perspectives, whether you manage people or you're managing operation, you're managing, implementing a strategic plan, in your mind, why do we even set goals? What's the purpose behind setting a goal? We know what it is. Now, why? I can always open up the chat too.
Because it's coming from outside of you, it's a requirement of you from someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, goals can be disseminated or they can be directed a lot of times. Is there any harm if we don't set our own goals? It's easy because this presentation really could be applied to our personal lives as well as our professional lives. But if somebody is not setting the goals for us, then what, right? So if they're not being set for us, we as leaders are responsible for setting up goals to accomplish certain things. Even if you don't have a strategic plan or direction or something that you need to follow, you still as a leader have to find, there has to be something for people to work towards, right? And it's other than operational, right? We can always talk about the operational goals throughout a day. There's always some kind of a goal of, make sure you're accomplishing this, this, and this. Well, that's part of your actual role. That's something you're always going to do. But maybe there's goals that you can work on with your employees that will help them perform those operational tasks better, right? So there are different types of goals, and we're going to talk about those as well. But we set goals because there has to be something for us to work towards. For an individual, maybe it's professional development goals. For a department, maybe it's a financial goal, or maybe there's some kind of quantifiable result, which is actually part of what we're going to talk about. You may have heard of things like key performance indicators or objectives and key results. Those are very management specific terms, but they do have an application in this setting. So those are some of the things that we want in terms of setting goals. And Jen, you're right. So a goal is also could be just improvement, right? We always want to be having that mindset of being more efficient, being better at our jobs, being better at the service that we provide to our local communities. All of those things are a part of what our responsibility is as leaders, but also in terms of our own innate self-motivation, right? So one of the key parts of a leader in emotional intelligence is self-motivation. So part of that is setting goals for ourselves. It could be personal goals, professional goals, and so on. But we set goals to give us a direction. We want to focus on where we want to end up. It gives you something you want to enhance. So you want to enhance something in your life. You want to enhance something about your position, or maybe you want to enhance something in the department or the library or whatever it is that you're responsible for, whatever that scope is for you. That's where those goals come into play. Now, a lot of times there are strategic directions. Maybe you do take order from others. Now, those others should be able to disseminate a goal to you that helps you, and we're going to talk later about this, see the framework, see the reason for those goals. And when you see those reasons, it's going to help you be more motivated and help others as well. But it affects performance by helping with attention and effort. persistence, sticking with something because you know that these various things you're doing are going to get you there. That helps reduce anxiety. I mean, a lot of times we know that you have a certain outcome to achieve, right? But if there's no goal tied to that, if there's no measures or different steps that you have to take, there's a lot of ambiguity. And I think employees perform better if the ambiguity is reduced as much as possible. If they understand, even if it's a very small accomplishment for them to achieve in that week, they see how that accomplishment is building up to a goal that you've set for that department or that area. When it is, we have to do this, and there's no real concrete plan to get there, that's when the anxiety and the stress from the ambiguity happens, right? We are the creatures that we are, human condition. We start to fill gaps if we don't know things. We have this predisposition of a thing called a mental model, and I could talk for another hour about that with all of you, but if we don't know things, we fill gaps with things, and then that's when you start to see the stress and anxiety, the productivity go down. If there's not something for someone to work towards or achieve or see, that's when you start to see some of those issues. Okay, so moving on. I tend to get off tangents here, but we set goals for growth. So whether it's personal, organizational goals, the idea is to get us out of our comfort zone, and we have to have that movement. We're moving forward, right? Anticipation, it gives you something to look forward to and work for. Like if you think about going on vacation, how many of you get excited for that? Maybe you put a countdown on your phone, right? There's that anticipation that in 4 days, 32 minutes, 60 seconds, I'm going on a plane to Florida or something, right? Remember what that feels like. So think about if you had a goal at work that gave you that same feeling, something to work towards, how that would feel in terms of the gratification that you get when you are actually accomplishing those tasks. The choice is part of the strategic planning in an organization, and for yourself, you get to choose the direction. So say there's an outcome that, the head of, again, depending on where you work, maybe there's an institutional goal. I'm just using a university context. Then you have your student affairs goal. Then you have your student success goal. Then you have a goal that you can set within the framework of where you're working, say in the library here at Clarkson, for instance. Well, how do all those goals and what you want to achieve help support the mission of the organization, and knowing that your role is going to have an impact on things that are bigger than yourself? That's where that feeling comes from. And then potential, again, that fulfilling of potential for self in the organization. All of that is a big piece of change, right? We're resistant to change naturally as humans because it makes us feel unsafe. And I use that term loosely, but when we feel that way, our brains, if we think about fight or flight, like even something as simple as not having goals and being in ambiguity, we shut down. But if we have an ability to give ourselves a framework of something to work towards and break it down, that goes away and we are more committed. But when we don't know, we start filling the gaps, the things we don't know, then our anxiety raises, and then this feeling that we have within ourselves, it starts to derail what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm getting a little bit off with the self-reflection stuff, but it's all very real and very interconnected. So real quick, we'll just, we think about goals, and when you're finished with today and maybe you sit down and you start talking about creating some goals, I would encourage you to think about timelines. So we're going to talk about timelines and how important that is. But, give yourself a framework of what kind of goals are, right? So we have immediate goals, things we have to do within the next, say, 30 days. Short-term goals, 9 months, 6 months, you get to define it, right? Remember, your choice. And then long-term goals. So long-term goals are still important because those long-term goals can also be a part of how you're filling in your immediate and short-term goals. I know I want to do this for the organization within 10 years. Life happens, maybe you won't be there, but let's pretend you are. Or you could use 5 years. And then I know for short term, we have to do this and this by that, by a certain timeline to get there. And then immediate, right? Think about the rungs on the ladder. We can't just, that leap all the way to, let's skip 5 steps, because I guarantee you that if you're skipping steps all the time, it will fail, because we haven't had a chance to really dive into one of the key questions about, and I said this earlier, and I meant to emphasize it, is the why. We always have to be able to answer why at every step of the way. And sometimes we have to go down 5, 6 layers of why before we actually get to something. But always ask yourself why. Why are we doing this goal? Why are we setting this objective? Why? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Why are we going in this direction? That goal should always have an answer to the why. And then of course, fixed goals, goals with an outcome that are based on a specific date and time, or flexible goals that have an outcome but no time limit. I think it's important we have a blend of the two, because I think overall, if we have things that are too fixed, that also can be a stressor. So have some stretch goals, right? Those can be flexible. You can adjust them as you go through. So one of the classes I teach, we learn about the art of reflection. There's three types of reflection. There's reflection in action, so things that you're doing at the time when you're dealing with those that particular problem or solving something. You know, we take a second and reflect. Reflection on action, so we're reflecting after the fact, and reflection for action. And I think that those three you do as a group, individually, and that helps you in terms of accomplishing and editing your goals as they go through. The three types of goals. So we're going to jump into some of the frameworks for goals, and one of my favorite frameworks that is the key takeaway to today's session. But this also is helpful if you think about what type of goal, and this is on the worksheet that I'm going to give you. There are three types of goals. There's process goals, there's performance goals, and there's outcome goals. So if we think about these three, process goals is, learning a new skill, carrying out actions that will improve your work, right? So the process of your work. So learning a new language, for instance, or mastering a new software, or trying to think, pitching an idea, undertakings that may make you more qualified, those types of things. Performance goals are based on your personal standard. Maybe there's particular areas that you want to improve in your job, such as written communication, customer acquisitions. I'm trying to think maybe there's more member retention. There's a lot of different things that you can be thinking about in terms of performance goals for yourself, ways that you can be better at your job in terms of a skill set. And then outcome goals, these are always like outside forces, like goals that landing a promotion or being elected is an honor of some sort. So an outcome goal, maybe I want to be elected chair of this particular organization or receive the top 40 under 40 leadership awards, or, whatever outcome from an external, validation, if you will. So external validation is an outcome goal. Again, those are tied to personal, but you can easily tie this to an organization, process goals of the work that you're doing now. So no matter what type of these three goals they all can fit into this framework that we're going to talk about. I like to talk about just realistic versus unrealistic goals. Not attainable in the time frame determined can lead to feelings of failure and self-esteem or image issues. And we're going to talk about why goals fail later on. But we have to provide a framework that helps us ensure that we don't set unrealistic goals. It's not going to be good for yourself. It's not good for the organization, because then you have people feeling like they're not performing, or the organization, the culture starts to be demotivated. There's a lot of concerns around setting things that are just unrealistic. I always joke, I've been in enrollment management for a long time, so I always, it's a balance between setting realistic enrollment targets versus what the college would like for enrollment targets, and I think that there's different perspectives on the same thing. So advocating for what you feel is right with the people that you report to, providing evidence of why, to support your goals, to ensure that they're realistic. Now, one of the greatest strategies, as we talked about earlier, is like the rungs on a ladder. You can set stretch goals for sure, but they have to be obtainable. And if they're not obtainable, you can reflect and think about the why. But overall, it's making sure that it's something you feel you can get to, but it might be tough. And I think it's a difference between, in my world, it's a difference between a 20% enrollment growth versus a 10% enrollment growth. Like, we'll try and grow, but let's just not go overboard. But it's not just about the outcome that makes it unrealistic. It's also if they're not timely, if it's just not obtainable because you don't have the resources. Working in the nonprofit world, sure, you'd love to be able to offer this to your community, or you'd love to be able to grow. I don't know, I'm trying to think of contact library stacks by a certain amount, or you're trying to improve the programming that you can offer, or the quantity of the programming you can offer, but you're never going to get a bigger budget, or, you're not going to have the opportunity or time to do things. So it might be realistic in your mind, but it's only realistic if all of the other stars align, right? In terms of that. So but also if you're too general or hard to focus on what the best outcome would be. So those are just some of the things to be keeping in our mind. But I really liked talking about this frame of mind, right? So it's important that when we have goals, they're realistic, all of the things we've talked about, and we're going to get into the framework today soon. But we also, I like this frame of mind thing, because I think all too often we talk about goal setting and making sure it's realistic, that we forget to fantasize. We forget to think about what might be possible. We have to make sure that those goals align with the goal, with the vision of the organization, or if they're a personal goal, align with your values. Where do you see yourself in 1 year, in 5 years? What type of organization do you have a vision for? Or where do you want to see the library in 10 years, 5 years? Where do you want to see your role in a municipality that you're involved with? I think it's important for us to dream. As someone mentioned earlier, it's important for us to think about that. Then we can whittle down to what might be realistic to get there. But all too often we're told to accomplish certain goals, or we have in our mind, but it doesn't mean we still can't dream. It's still, we can still put everything down on paper. This would be great if we could do this, if we could do that, if we could do this. Then let's apply the framework and think about, well, we can't get there yet, but we could get here. And then this is how we're going to do it. And then that motivates us. And who knows, if you accomplish goal A, right? And then maybe the next year, because you were successful, you're able to get a little bit more budget, or you're able to add another line or do something, and then goal B happens. It doesn't mean that what you fantasize about today isn't possible down the road, but let's set up a pathway to that. That's where we talk about long-term, short-term, immediate goals. And then fantasies can be reality depending on how hard you're willing to work for them. So we talked about unrealistic versus realistic goals and stretch goals and all of those things. But you can define, that effort that you put into things can define how you're going to accomplish that goal. One example, is, so I really love talking about emotional intelligence. And I think one of the biggest aspects to that is that it argues IQ is not the sole determinant for success, right? We're born with an IQ, we're born with personalities, but it's that self-motivation and that work ethic that comes from strong emotional intelligence. Those that manage relationships, manage themselves well, allows you to accomplish goals. And the people that you might know of that have accomplished so much, right? If you were to do an IQ test on them, doesn't mean they're the smartest people. Is that they found a way to self-motivate, they found a way to motivate others, and they've helped get those frameworks going where people are inspired, right? We talk about the different types of leaders that people just are, they call emergent leaders. They're people that just want to follow them because they're just motivating. Well, some of that is tied to this, right? That they are able to self-motivate, even in times when they're not interested in something. You're able to dig deep, right? There's a video about becoming a Navy SEAL, and it is not necessarily the strongest people that become Navy SEALs. It's the one that are able to put service above self. They help others, even though they themselves are able to accomplish a lot. So anyway, so that's really what we're talking about here, is that effort piece, the aim. I just noticed the time, so I gotta get to the point here, right? So aim, define goals by working to identify a balance between fantasy and reality. That's where the framework you're going to hear about comes into play. We got to find benchmarks. We got to set some realistic targets. We have to have an aim that can support the fantasy and balance it. I mean, the method, hard look at the truth, narrow choices, goals, and hopes. So this is where we talk about the different types of goals. And then evaluation, look at the results, but don't make it the last step. Reflection evaluation must always be ongoing. And that's when we get down to the last part of the framework. All too often we set a goal, we try to achieve the goal, and whether or not we achieve it, how many times do we actually reflect on it and assess what went right, what went wrong, what methods were the best? All of those things sometimes we miss. And when we miss those things, we don't necessarily recalibrate and create another goal that will support what didn't go well here and ensure success in the future. Or we set a goal, we accomplish it, and then we forget about the goal. But really that goal could build into something even bigger and better. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, is that we can't lose assessment and evaluation just because we accomplished something. Another great quote of mine. Vision is not enough, right? So we talk about the organization, but it must be combined with a venture. It's not simple as this. It's not enough to stare up the steps. We must step up the steps. Going back to my ocean analogy and my ladder analogy. It's one thing to see the top, right? So that I think about that movie, Rocky, where he's in Philadelphia and he climbs up those stairs and he celebrates at the top. Well, those steps represent what we need to create to accomplish our goals. And I think, it's if we think about it that way and we break it down into short, immediate things we must do, blah, blah, all that different stuff, that gives us the framework. And so really what I wanted to, before we jump into the model is the idea of a goal is the macro level, right? It's the organizational goal. It's your own personal goal. But one of the things that we can't forget about is objectives and tactics. So in the worksheet, you'll see this. This is an overarching piece to the model I want to talk about, but goals is something that we set, right? This is a bigger picture goal. Think of it from where you work. Maybe you have a goal of accomplishing a very specific thing. But now you need to have objectives. So the objective is the driver that is going to get you there, right? So I have a goal of doing this. So now I need an objective, which represents essentially what it is that I'm going to do, right? I have an objective, or maybe I have a goal of improving retention of membership. So now I need an objective that's very specific. The objective is to decrease, late returns, or increase software development, increase access, increase very specific things that support the goal, kind of like a strategic plan in an organization, right? So you have a long, bigger picture goal, but then in your area, what's your objective to help support that goal? Okay. And then with that objective comes tactics. The tactics or action items, these are the very specific things that you need to do to achieve the objective. And when you achieve the objective, you're supporting the success of the goal. So it's one thing to say, let's set some goals, but it's important that we can break it down, because a goal is going to be bigger. And then we have to have objectives and tactics that are a part of achieving those goals. They feed up to the goal, right? So the tactic can be something as granular as what every person does every week that achieves a certain objective. That objective was set to support the goal. So you can break it down like a ladder into, these are the daily things we need to do to accomplish this objective. How do we know when we've accomplished the objective? Well, that's when a model comes into play to help us document and set what things need to happen for us to know that they were successful. It's one thing for us to say, well, we want them to be successful, but what does that even look like, right? So that's going to be the next piece here. And I have a question mark on here. So our goals, objectives, and tactics should all be in the same context of answering our very favorite question: what is the why? Before we get into all of these and we start creating them, everything we do needs to create the why that goal exists. Once we create the why of that goal existing, then it's easier for us to say, well, here's the objective. Well, why is that the objective? Well, because if we accomplish this objective, we're going to have this particular piece of the goal will be accomplished. Okay, that sounds good. So how are we going to accomplish the objective? Well, we have to do, Joe over here has to do this. And then in our meetings, we're going to have to start doing this. And then on Tuesdays, we have to make sure we do this, right? So those are the tactics, and you still should be able to answer the why. Everything feeds up. It's kind of like, if any of you have ever been a part of needs assessments, like in your town or other types of organizations, they actually, there's a diagram, a sheet of diagrams, a fishbone diagram, and you should be able to answer the whys and dig deep. You should never have anything that's a part of your goal where you can't answer a why. They should always be in alignment. Okay, so 12 o'clock on the dot, let's talk about SMART goals. So now we know what goals are. We have some metaphors in place about the why. We've talked about some of the mental model pieces, the fantasizing about goals, the understanding of all of what they are and why we should have them. And now we know that goals objectives and tactics are part of the support structure for goals. So now we're going to talk about the actual framework that you can use to apply to those three pieces of the goal, the objective, and the tactic. And that is through a process called SMART goals. SMART goals must be specific, They must be measurable. They should be attainable, right? We talked about realistic versus unrealistic. They should be relevant to what you're looking to accomplish, both personally and professionally, and then time-based. And this framework helps us think about, okay, here's my goal. Here's what I think my goal is. Now let's test it against these 5 things. And then once I test it against these 5 things, can then I apply it to when I go to create objectives and tactics with my team, do those also enter into and can I test them against the SMART framework? So let's talk a little bit more specifically about these. So we're aligning objectives and tactics to our SMART goals collectively and together. So in terms of the goals, so we have to answer the 5 questions, the 5 W's. How many of us remember the 5 who, what, where, why, and how? What do I want to accomplish? Or what does the organization want to accomplish? Or what does my team want to accomplish? Sometimes it's directed, right? Sometimes we're told we have to have a certain outcome. And that's fine. Sometimes that's going to happen, but it doesn't mean we can't still apply what we're directed to do against the framework. Because we still have to find a way to accomplish those goals, motivate others. We still have all of these other aspects we've talked about, whether we're creating them ourselves or we're being directed to accomplish something. We still have the opportunity here. In terms of the what do I want to accomplish? In terms of why, what are the specific reasons, purposes, or benefits of accomplishing the goal? The who's involved, where, that could be a location, that could be online, it could be lots of different things. And then the which, so we have to identify what requirements and what constraints are there. What are some of the things that we have to be thinking about when we're looking at being specific? Now, there are other things you might be able to do to help answer these questions. So maybe some of you during strategic planning processes or conversations about the future of where you work, maybe you've done things like SWOT analysis, right? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? What are the things that can impede us from moving forward as an organization, or as a group, or as you name it. Once you do things like that, that gives you context to create the specific part of a SMART goal. But goals have to have expected outcomes stated as simply and as clearly as possible. A goal there's an end. What does that end look like? What is it, whether it's successful or not, there still is a defined end. Whether or not you achieve it in the time that you wanted to achieve it, you still have to set it. State exactly what you want to do. Be clear about what you want to achieve. And we've already gone through the different W's, but be as specific as possible. And we have to be able to measure the specificity that we're setting. And that's where another part of the goal comes in that we're going to talk about. We can be specific, we can be very specific, but we still have to have that outcome, and that outcome has to be measured somehow, right? So we'll talk about that. So that's the specific of a SMART goal. Next is measurable. So you must have concrete facts, be able to answer in detail when and how you'll know you've attained the goal, which we talked about. Now there's 2 models out there that allow you to measure that success. And so the KPI one is a little bit newer. I think these are wonderful tools. I think that we sometimes I've seen people get too caught up in, well, what's the KPI on that? And I think they're important to use, but at the same time, there is a lot of other factors, right, to goals. And knowing these are important, but knowing them alone is not the motivation that you might need to impart on others. So we can talk about KPIs, we can talk about, this is what success will look like, and here's how we're going to measure it. But we can't forget the human aspect of setting goals and objectives and tactics. We can't just come and say, hey, the KPI said you're going to have 4% growth by the end of this week. I'm not sure if you're going to do that. So, it doesn't look like we're going to accomplish our goal. That's only part A, right? Let's also figure out how to be vulnerable with each other and have that trust. Because when you have trust in a team, they'll say, I really don't know what I'm doing, or I made a mistake. So we work together in that way. Then we can help people ensure that whatever we have to fix along the way so that they can meet this KPI, that's the other pieces to this puzzle. One of my favorite authors, I do a workshop on this called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Patrick Lencioni is one of my favorite authors. and he talks about the 5 dysfunctions of why teams fail. And those teams fail, meaning is really so directly connected to the SMART goals, or the lack of support in a SMART goal. So when I send the slides, there are links here on videos to give you an overview for those who've never heard these terms on what a key performance indicator is, or an objective and key results. The objective and key results are a little bit older terminology than the key performance indicators. They sound fancy, but essentially what it's saying is it's a way to quantify or set those targets of what does success look like in my goal, and it could be used. These are some of the methods that you can do that. So you still have to create a SMART goal, but your unit of measure, right, are these KPIs and OKRs. Sounds fancy, but watch the videos. You'll see they're not, but it is important, and I think that it's a real concrete way to set the measurable piece of your SMART goal. Think from and to. Measurements give feedback and let us know when our goal is complete. We've already talked about that. And a goal that contains specific numbers and dates keep you on track and provide ways to measure success, right? So kind of like in enrollment, we set enrollment goals. Those enrollment goals are based on various statistics and things like that. But we also know a key performance indicator is achieving a certain amount of enrollment, as an example. Okay, so we have specific, we have measurable. Now we have achievable. So this is where we talked about, achievable versus unachievable goals earlier on. They have to be realistic versus unrealistic, excuse me. We have to answer the question, how? How can the goal be accomplished? Outcomes that are realistic in a given situation or timeframes, goals and agreed upon are accepted by those responsible for achieving it, right? So we have that whole dysfunction of a team thing starts with trust and accountability. And then commitment is one of the dysfunctions, and that's where the achievable piece falls apart. If you don't have everyone on board, you don't have that full commitment, it makes achievable goals really hard to reach. So they should be challenging yet achievable. We have to continue to stay motivated and find ways to motivate others, motivate ourselves, going back to that emotional intelligence piece. Relevant, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant. They should build on one another. So this is where we talked about those different types of goals. You can't set a goal that's not relevant to another goal or relevant to the mission of an organization. A goal must represent an objective towards which we are both, or all of us, are willing and able to work. So we have to look towards tying our goal with the mission and vision, what we talked about. Our goal needs to be important to us, relevant in our ultimate, business situation or business vision. So I mentioned earlier, tied to a strategic goal or strategic plan. Tied to my own personal goal. Maybe you're setting goals for your own professional development. So is it obtainable? Is it reachable? I can tell you for myself, one of the goals I've always had for myself personally was to go on for my doctorate. I started it at a previous institution, then had kids, then had this, then had that. So I false started a few more times. So, I think it's great to have that goal, but I don't think I set myself up for something that's able to grow towards that. I didn't have shorter, more relevant goals. So I'm doing that now, finishing up a college teaching cert, and that gets me one step closer. So these are just examples of reevaluating, reassessing, because things are going to happen in our lives. Things happen in our jobs, restructuring or realignments or this or that, and things get derailed for a while. But if we know that our goals are still there, let's break them down and make them more relatable, more relevant, instead of just going towards that. So they have to be tied to the mission, vision, goals, tied to your values. So we talked about this earlier. Short-term goals that support longer-term goals, and so on and so forth. So they have to be relevant. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, kind of, foreshadowing the SMART goal system, but they have to be relevant. Last one is time-bound, and this is one that I think is sometimes more difficult for us. Is we can be specific, yep, we can reach this goal, we have this, we have that, but if we don't put a time frame on it, how easy is it for us to just push that down the priority list, right? And I think I'm trying to think of examples. I mean, I'm not usually a procrastinator, but boy, when I do it right. So if I don't put a time frame on something, then I'm just going to put it off. So another example is, so I work in graduate admissions. So I've done a lot of workshops in the past where, if there is a deadline to apply for a particular program, that's one thing. I mean, that could be the long-term goal, or studying for a test or anything, but students tend to push things off. Oh yeah, it's not due till April, and it's, I don't know, say it's January. it's so easy for them to put everything off. And then like the 2 days beforehand, they're trying to do everything. And then you have all these other factors that we talked about earlier, anxiety, ambiguity, all these other issues, right? But if we can teach them about creating smart goals for themselves, okay, I know I want to have my statement of intent done by here. I want to have my standardized test done by this time. I want to have all my application materials done by this time. So we create short time-bound goals. We know that these are all part of that longer term goal. These are the rungs on the ladder, accomplishing the different things that are required in an application. It's less stress, right? So because we're working through those things and we set ourselves with a goal to have something done by the end of the week, that helps us be motivated to want to do something more the next week or something new the next week. But if we don't have a timeline on it, we're going to keep pushing it all off until it's all at the end. We're not going to be motivated to do it. Like how many of us, myself included, say, we get so overwhelmed that we just shut down. For some reason in the human condition, if we have too much to do, we just shut down and don't do anything. But if we have a way to take our to-do list and turn it into SMART goals, it's less stressful. We can space things out and do things better. So goals without deadlines or schedules for completion tend to be overtaken by day-to-day crisis and invariable arise in an organization. And that happens a lot here. Like I'll have students walking in all the time and I have this big project I have to work on, right? But we don't have a deadline on that. There's no sense of urgency. We have to use smarter goals to create a sense of urgency. So goals should include realistic timeframes for achievement. They include start, end, and fixed times. The timeframes should have realistic yet aggressive considerations, periods of achievement, milestones, right? So break this down. Like by the end of the first month, I want to have this set for the team, and those are important, right? To have this idea of time to celebrate the small wins, celebrate things that are happening to get us there. And break down your bigger goals into smaller ones, which we've already talked about. So a goal without a timeline is like TNT without a detonator. It has a lot of potential, but will never achieve much. Okay, so that's the SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. I'd like to argue that I like the acronym I want to introduce you to is a smarter goal. And I think it's tied to the success of an organization, tied to our values, all the things we've talked about. So I want to introduce two last ones, is goal-based ethics. A goal is comprised of the many actions to accomplish an overall outcome. Do the actions we're taking to achieve goals justify the end result? Are we doing what's in the best for all involved and not just whatever it takes to reach a goal? So we talked about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. When you don't have accountability and commitment, you're afraid of conflict, all these other things, then we start doing things for ourselves. Have you ever been on a situation where someone's not pulling their weight in a team, or there isn't buy-in, but you don't want to be associated with the failure, so then you do whatever it takes to get to that, over that hurdle. So you create your own goals, your own motivation. What I would argue here is the ethics of it, right? So one example would be like a law firm partner. So they're going to work early, staying late, doing research, taking on additional college courses to get them there. Those are all part of what I would consider to be ethical, SMART goal settings, right? But the unethical would be, maybe this person is exposing a coworker for something they did wrong, or leaking information to the other side of a court case, or something along those lines. The end result is they still achieved their goal, becoming partner, but was it done in an ethical way? So that would be my E to the smarter goal. And then this is the last one, and you'll see this on a couple other ones, is recorded and reviewable. There's actually a link I put somewhere, I think it's on another slide at the end, about the actual neuroscience of writing down your goals and its connection to actually achieving your goals. And this is where you can create your own framework. You can have mini, so Christy put mini celebrations, all of these different things that help you, your own motivations. But recording your goals really helps your own accountability, making them public goals, right? So saying the goals out loud to somebody helps others may feel, their friends, right? Their colleagues are going to help keep you accountable. But record your goals and commit them to paper. Keep records or a journal to find out where you are. Prioritize your goals. Break large goals into sub goals, which we talked about. I've already mentioned the reflection in, for, and on action framework. I can certainly share more about that. But that includes reflection and assessment of yourself, as well as your team and your organization. And all of that is a part of assessing your goals assessing your KPIs we've talked about, and then adjusting accordingly. Seek faith, as I mentioned, seek feedback and be transparent with our goals, and build in the accountability and external evaluation. I also love this guy, Mark Murphy. He said the secret to getting where you are and where you want to be is to make your goals. This aligns a little bit with what we talked about earlier. I just want to put this in here, is this heartfelt attachment to goals, right? So motivating people, like what's their role in it? What's the outcome? Why should they care? The heartfelt attachment to goals will directly correlate to the motivation that you have and then your others have, right? So if you're in an NPO and you're doing some great work, you're supporting literacy in your community, you all have that care gene that I love to talk about. That care gene is going to create heartfelt attachment to those goals. Create goals that are so alive in your mind that not reaching them leaves you extremely dissatisfied. Use your imagination, visual every aspect of your goal. You got to kill procrastination. So we all know what works for us, right? So creating time-bound goals is huge. I recently learned, so we use Gmail here, and I recently learned that there's a task bar. So I have all these tasks that I assigned due dates to them, and those due dates show up in my calendar. Boy, it's good at keeping me accountable, because I'm good at, like, I show up at my meetings and I have all these things going on. But if I'm looking at my meetings for the day and right there is all of the tasks that are due for that day, it has really enhanced my productivity in making sure I'm prioritizing tasks in the timelines that are needed. So finding tools to allow for that. So I also use Trello with my team here, and we create goals. Then we use Trello to break that down into our objectives and our tactics for the week, the month, so on and so forth. And they should challenge ourselves. We can't just create goals that we know we're going to achieve that are easy, they're not aspirational. We have to be able to set something that's attainable, but we have to work for it. It goes back to that earlier. We talked about a goal as something where effort is a part of it. That's why we have to make goals hard. We can't make them easy, because the effort won't be there and you'll wind up not even accomplishing them. So as terms of outcomes, I do apologize. I noticed the time, so I want to make sure to keep moving here. But a goal that's not written down. So there's the link, why goals fail. The goal's not written down. It's a great article. Rewards for achieving goals are not given or clear. We have to have those rewards. Sometimes they're intrinsic. They don't have to be money or a gift card or, what have you. Sometimes intrinsic rewards are enough, right? Motivation, promotion, all of those different things that we talked about earlier, those can be just as effective. Intrinsic rewards can be huge, especially for some of the things that we've been talking about. A goal that's is unrealistic or not specific enough, right? If they're not a realistic goal in terms of the relevant piece of SMART, if they're not specific enough, we are really going to struggle. Goal that is not believable or little commitment exists. Goals that are not set, they keep changing or switching. How many of you have been a part of that? Oh, today we're going to focus on this. Today we're going to do that. That goal is no longer relevant. That wishy-washiness is also, it's a killer of work culture too. Yes, and Mark Murphy, I've heard of the high five. Mel Robbins does the high five. Right? Mark Murphy he's the author of the article I was talking about. So tactics not aligned with objectives. Maybe you haven't really been granular enough with your goals so that everybody has a role in it. And if you didn't create SMART goals, you said, here's our goal. So tomorrow we're going to do this, and the next day we're going to do this. Give it a framework. Smarter goals is a great way to do that. So you set a goal and then create the worksheet, fill it out. What are some things that we need to do to create these goals? And when you build this together, if you're trying to accomplish a goal with a team, that helps with buy-in. If everyone has a voice, that healthy conflict is there. Another Patrick Lencioni quote, and love that book, The 5 Dysfunctions, right? So if that's not there, if you don't have healthy conflict and not everybody feels heard, you're not going to have that commitment. And when you don't have that commitment, you don't have SMART goals. So again, my plug for the ideas of motivation. So motivation and commitment is what makes us strive for achievement. We have to choose goals that matter. Goals with employees, make sure it's something important to them. Have open discussions about why it matters to them, or help them understand why it matters to them. If it's a directed goal, they still should have pride in their work, and that pride in their work is a part of that motivation. But if you can help somebody get that personal investment, right, so that heartfelt attachment, that's the plan that makes the work feel more gratifying, wants them to contribute more to setting those goals. And once they set them, there's that excitement of accomplishing something, right? Motivation, can also be derived from the idea that someone else is depending on them, right? So helping them see their role in it, but also, we really need you. You're really good at this part. We really would value your input. We want to be heard as humans. We want to have positive feelings. That idea of, to get nerdy again, limbic resonance, right? We are emotional beings, and we want to feel good by setting achievable goals, smart goals that we all accomplish together. We feel good. It feels good. And then we want to do it again and again and again, right? Helps release those endorphins. We crave them as humans. And of course, monitoring progress, but leaders need to be agents of change. That's what we're ultimately talking about, creating high levels of emotion, energy, symbolism around these goals. All of those different things are a part of this. And then commitment. When you have commitment, it creates more accountability, sets us on a course to reach our goals. Makes commitment is like investing your savings in a business. You lose it all if it fails. That's the level of commitment that you always strive for. Doesn't mean we're always going to get that, but we want people to be just as committed to success that they're willing to take the failure. And the more personal you make the motivation, the more commitment statements from each goal, the more motivated you'll be to accomplish them. So to reiterate with that commitment, so write down your goals, make a public commitment, get the team to hold people accountable. Now, that's the other thing I would just put a plug in real quick, is that accountability is not necessarily just vertical. I think when you have a group that's committed to a common goal, you've set this goal together that we've talked about today, accountability has to be peer-to-peer as well. That peer-to-peer accountability helps us ensure that our tactics are successful, we're reaching our objectives. All of those are a part of this. There sure is vertical accountability. Absolutely. Leaders have to be able to hold people accountable. But when you have that commitment, the level of commitment we're talking about, peer-to-peer accountability is going to happen. But if you don't see that accountability from above, sure, you're like, well, so-and-so is going to let this person get away with it, so what's the point? All that's tied in together. And then rewards, we talked about rewards. So even accomplishing a minor goal or action towards a goal or a tactic is a cause for celebration. Celebrate accomplishments and create symbols, rituals. You can have tangible prizes or outward recognition or intrinsic motivation, and figure out what intrinsically motivates people, what intrinsically motivates yourself. All of that is a key to this. So I want to play you just a part of this video. There's actually a book that this person put out, but when we talk about the changes we want to create, the motivation we want to create, it can start very small, as we talked about.
If you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task, and another, and another. And by the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that the little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you'll never be able to do the big things right. And if by chance you have a miserable day, you will come home to a bed that is made, that you made. And a made bed gives you encouragement that tomorrow will be better. To pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is the night swim. Before the swim, the instructors joyfully brief the students on all the species of sharks that inhabit the waters off San Clemente. They assure you, however, that no student has ever been eaten by a shark, at least not that they can remember. But you are also taught that if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground. Do not swim away. Do not act afraid. And if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you, then summons up all your strength and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. There are a lot of sharks in the world. If you hope to complete the swim, you will have to deal with them. So if you want to change the world, don't back down from the sharks. Over a few weeks, if you want to change the world.
And then, of course, I like to leave with one motivational video here. So to wrap this up, I'm going to play this short video, and then we can pause for questions and end today's session.
Just for a moment, let's play a game. Let's pretend that your telephone rings tomorrow morning. The voice on the other end says, John, I've got some marvelous news for you. We've just won a trip to Acapulco. There are going to be 4 of us that can go. There are only 2 of us, my wife and myself. We leave at exactly 8:45. We're going to stay on the beach 4 days. We will live in a millionaire's villa. We will have everything at our beck and call. We will live the life of luxury for 4 full days. Now remember, John, we leave tomorrow morning at 8:45. My only question is, can you be ready to go at 8:45? May I see the hands of those who could, in fact, respond and say, yes, I could go. Just for a moment, let's continue the game by saying, you got the telephone call, you accept it, then all of a sudden it dawns on you, hey, I've got some things to do. As a matter of fact, I've got to do this and this and this and this and this. And as a matter of fact, you turn to your wife and say, honey, I just don't know whether or not we can make it or not. She says, now hold the phone, John. She whips out a sheet of paper. She says, now what's the first thing we got to do? What's the second thing? What's the third thing? What's the fourth thing? What's the fifth thing? How many of you, honest to goodness, believe that during the next 24 hours you could get more done than you normally get accomplished in 3, 4, 5, 6 days? Would you hold up your hands, please? Here's my question, please. Why don't you go to Acapulco tomorrow? Every day of your life. Why don't you, in your own mind, say, tomorrow I go to Acapulco if I get this done today? Do you realize that if you were to do that and schedule it and lay it out, that it would be just a matter of weeks before you could, in fact, go to Acapulco at any time that you wanted to, or anywhere else? Are goals necessary? I'm going to say emphatically yes. Can you imagine the chairman of the board, General Motors, and somebody comes to him and says, how did you get to be chairman of the board, General Motors? Do you really believe he said, well, I just showed up for work. They started promoting him. First thing, here you know, here I am, chairman of the board, General Motors. No, I think you know that that is not the way that it happened. What about you? Are you a wandering generality? Or are you a meaningful, specific? People today complain.
So this video, I also threw another one at the end for you to watch on your own if you'd like to, but thank you so much for allowing me to join you today. Hopefully you can take the idea of the SMARTER goals framework and apply that to your work or your personal life, and just think about, how do we ensure that we are setting these goals? How do we sustain them? How do we use them to motivate ourselves and those that we work with? And really take our organization to the next level, or our own goals to the next level. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.